be more like a storytelling instead of a lecture. So please just join in if you have something you want to ask. Okay, let's begin.
Oh, I also begin the recording session. I hope you don't mind.
Oh yeah,
So
sure.
we need to record everything. So
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, please just jump in. You can send the chat or yeah, you can just speak up. Okay, so share slide. Okay, here we are. The title of today's presentation is Indigenous People and International Environmental Law. And for so I asked Bulinda about the class, and most of you are actually on the third semester, right? And but some of you are from older semesters. So basically, I just want to tell about the general overview of Indigenous people issue and its relationship to the environmental law. In the first part of this presentation, I will explain about the definitions of Indigenous people, and then we'll go to the Indigenous people's perspectives towards environment, and then the international instruments related to Indigenous people and environment, and finally, we'll close it with future for Indigenous people and environment. This one, the last part, is more about discussion instead of me telling you information about it. Okay, so first, who are indigenous people? I believe that this term is not something new to all of you. You probably heard about the concept or the terminology of indigenous people. Indigenous people in Bahasa Indonesia, we're familiar with this terms such as masyarakat hukum adat or masyarakat adat, to put it in a simplistic way. And if we try to look for the definition of indigenous people, there are actually dozens of them out there, and they're coming from different international instruments. So, for example, here I put the one from the ILO Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention, number 169. In this convention, ILO actually separate the definition between tribal peoples and the indigenous people. So we have two different categories here. And I want you to pay attention that when they established this definition, it was in 1989. Okay, 1989. And the issue about indigenous people rights um, began to grow in a huge scale right after that in the 90s and the 2000s. So this convention is one of the earliest that really focused on the indigenous people. Okay, so Article 1 of this convention states that tribal peoples in independent countries whose social, cultural, and economic conditions distinguish, distinguish them from other sections of the national community and whose status is regulated wholly or partially by their own customs or traditions or by spatial laws or regulations. Okay? And the next one, for the indigenous peoples, the convention states that peoples in independent countries who are regarded as indigenous on account of their descent from the populations which inhabited the country or a geographical region to which the country belongs at the time of conquest or colonization or the establishment of present state boundaries, and who, irrespective of their legal status, retain some or all of their own social, economic, cultural, and political institutions. So I already put some keywords in red here, and you, I want to ask you guys, based on the comparison between these two definitions, what are actually the bottom line of um, this whole idea about indigenous people?
If I may, I
Yes,
think
sir. Can you please mention your name?
my name is Fajar.
Okay, I project.
Uh,
Yes.
and I think the main difference between indigenous people and not indigenous people, I think, is the uh, distinguishment by law. I think
By law,
how they're
interesting. Yes.
differentiated,
Yeah.
maybe
Uh-huh.
from their customs or social, cultural, and or economic conditions.
Okay. And what do you mean by social culture and economic conditions? What do you have in your
Uh,
mind?
I think, for example, because somehow indigenous people are anti-social too. For example, how the social, uh, so I think they're kind of antisocial of how, for example, with the rest is going on. Wait, I have a,
Okay.
so for example, normally people would, how their economic kind of situation would be, for example, by buying and selling. While for example, indigenous people are trading, so they don't actually have money, but they have
Mm-hmm.
an asset, but not money.
So
But
it's
it's
like
money for them.
barter system. Is that
Yeah, for
what
example, like that.
you're
Yeah,
referring to? Okay. Okay.
yeah.
If I may know where you're from, Pajak, from which part of this
Uh,
beautiful archipelago?
Jakarta.
From Jakarta. Oh,
Yep.
okay. So, do you think that Indonesian people like you and me right now can be considered as indigenous?
Uh,
What do you
as
think?
per se, I wouldn't say so because
Mhm.
from the flow of how of our lifestyle is
Yes.
uh is some sort of way how the rest of the majority of the world actually works as well. So I think from the
Like
term
using
antisocial,
internet and eating hamburger like that?
uh I think in the sense of like social, cultural, and economic condition. I think.
Okay.
Yep.
Nice. Okay. Thank you very much. It's actually, we will come back to that
Yep.
answer in a
Thank you.
very short time. Okay. So, having known this definitions from the ILO Convention, let's check the other one. So, this one is from the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And considering the diversity of, in terms of definition of indigenous peoples, so the official or the standardized term for indigenous itself has not been um, adopted yet by any UN system body. So instead of making a definition about indigenous itself, they are what they do is actually I'm still working. Sorry. Yeah. Um, I'm sorry. It was my nephew. Um, sorry. Instead of defining what indigenous is, they're putting this several factors or several elements that is perceived to be um, the core identity of the indigenous people itself. The first is self identification as indigenous peoples at the individual level and accepted by the community as their member. Second, historical continuity with pre colonial and or pre settler societies. The third one is strong link to territories and surrounding natural resources, a distinct socio-economic or political system, distinct language, culture, and beliefs, form non-dominant groups of society, resolve to maintain and reproduce their ancestor environments and systems as distinctive peoples and communities. Okay, so based on these elements, then we can figure out whether Fajar or me are actually indigenous or not. So whether we fall to that category or not. Okay, but then there's another question. So, um, and I will show you in the next slide. Okay, indigenous people and environment. So, is there anyone who are familiar with this scene or this tradition called Wiwitan? Or any of you probably from Central Java, from Boyolali, from Klaten, or from Karanganyar? No, not at all in this class. Okay, so this is a tradition called Wiwitan, and the Japanese practice this tradition to pay homage to Goddess Shri. Who's Goddess Shri? Well, I think we're familiar with this whole concept of Sri as rice, right? So usually our parents will tell us to finish up our rice because otherwise the goddess will cry or the goddess will be very sensitive and melodramatic. Okay. Um, so the traditional Javanese people consider that nature is actually um, they're actually part of nature. So it's not the other way around. So it's not that no. So it's not that human is the center of the universe, but human lives in balance with the nature. So from time to time, they must practice this spirituality in honor of the environment that they live in, and they take a lot of benefits from it. And this pattern is also shown is also can be found in another island, for example in the Patalasang Adat community in South Sulawesi, where they have this belief that the forest is alive. So they can they can exploit the forest, the nature, but with some limitation, meaning that they must treat the forest as god. So when they take something, they must also give something. So if you take some trees, you chop down some trees, then as an homage or honor to the god who owned the forest, you must plant another tree. So it's that concept. So the what I'm trying to say here is the indigenous peoples are very unique due to their relationship with the environment or the nature itself. So they see the nature is something that is alive, and the environment itself, not just the one who provides them with all these necessities, but also they must take in charge for the preservation of the nature itself. And here are some of the international instruments related to the indigenous people and environmental issue. Actually, the first one that is mentioned, um, the first one, sorry. Oh, oh, oh. Okay, so the first discussion about um, indigenous people actually originated from the ICCPR Article 27. But mind you, in this covenant, you would not find the term indigenous at all. So Article 27 used this term, ethnic minority. So a lot of these international instruments that came later on after the ICCPR refers to that interpret the Article 27 on ethnic minority to accommodate the issue about indigenous people, and this including their relationship with the nature, because in the Article 27 of the ICCPR, it states that the state must respect the religion and also the cultural practice of this ethnic minority. So they linked the close relationship that indigenous people have with with nature um, under the same protection. And later on, we have ILO Indigenous and Tribal Populations Convention 1947, followed by ILO Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention 1989. I actually want to talk about what makes these two conventions are different. They look the same, but they're actually very different. But then I think we don't have time for that. We'll just skip this and probably bring it up in the discussion. And in 1992, there's a Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, and this actually like the gong, where the issue of indigenous people environment begin to attract more and more attention. And then in 1993, there's a Convention on Biological Diversity. This is actually a follow up of the Rio Declaration. And the interesting thing is, although Convention on Biological Diversity focus more on the environmental aspect, but this is the first convention that actually acknowledge the acknowledge a traditional knowledge. This term called traditional knowledge, and traditional knowledge cannot be separated from the indigenous people's practice to the environment itself. And finally, in 2007, we have the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of People, and this whole declaration also closely linked the indigenous people's life with the environment itself. So when we talk about indigenous people environment, it's two sides of the same coin. So it's inseparable. And
May I ask a question?
yes, sure. And
Okay.
who's this?
Bondan.
Okay.
All right. So regarding the last declaration, the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, pursuant, I forgot which specific article. I think it was Article 26 or 25. I
Okay.
forgot. In that article, and it is stated that states that are party to the UNDRIP are expected to basically not only recognize the legal status of indigenous people, but also provide protection towards their territories and lands, resources, etc. To my knowledge, if I'm not mistaken, Indonesia has indeed adopted the UNDRIP. So, but the reality of the protection of indigenous people in Indonesia regarding their lands and territory are still actively breached, such as in the case, I think it was Freeport, when they occupied Adat lands and used Adat forest as a dumping ground for tailing or for mining residual. So, in that regard, do you think that international legal instruments such as the UNDRIP, which is legally binding, actually carry enough weight or at least efficacy to impose accountability for Indonesia regarding the protection of their indigenous people?
Okay. Thank you for the very interesting question. Um, I will address this later after I finish the presentation, because this is related to law in the book and law in reality, and how sometimes international politics is not just about signing or becoming a participatory state in a covenant or a certain declaration. So there are actually more dimensions to it, more uh, interest behind the process itself, and also the practice of the state covenant in the signatory state. But we'll come back to that, and I believe this Bulinda will can explain more about the politics behind this. Okay, so okay, now come back to this slide before I finish my presentation. So we know that the indigenous people and environment, they're inseparable. Basically, that's the very core element of indigeneity itself. And but most of the time, when we talk about only talk about international environmental instrument, it is not enough to protect the indigenous people's needs. So here, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, they have a special approach using human rights to accommodate environmental issue and also the indigenous people issue. So it's like what is the peribahasa, shooting two birds with one stone? Yeah, something like that. So using human rights, you can actually protect both environmental needs, both the indigenous people rights and their environmental needs. So in the case of community of San Mateo de Huancor and its member versus the state of Peru in 2004, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights created this spatial approach where they see the problem is not just related to the right to life. So this national mining company is polluting the water sources of San Mateo de Huancor a community. So uh, the community then went to the commission and used the right to life and the right to health and also the right to environment to in order to handle this problem. But this is very interesting because the commission rejected the right to life reasoning, but accept the right to environment and I'm sorry, I forgot the right term for this, the precise term. But what I'm trying to say here is what is considered to be private life in the European system, such as the right to life and right to have a private life. Those reasoning was rejected by the commission, but then commission accepted the case and deemed it admissible due to the relationship between environment and indigenous life. So here, the commission didn't see any problem with the right to private life. I'm sorry, I did say right to life, but what I meant before is right to private life. So it's not right to life, right? Right to private life. Because of this, because of the different point of view that the commission had with the European one, and agreed that this case is admissible because of the relationship between environment and the indigenous community. I hope it's clear. We can come back here later in the discussion. But like the bottom line here is that um, human rights can also be used to protect both environment and also the indigenous people rights. Felicia, you want to say something?
May I add something, sir? So you mentioned before there is a difference between right to life and right to private life, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
what is the difference actually?
Okay, so right to life in general is that one shall not be killed. Bottom line, for whatever reason, that's the right to life. Okay, and the right to private life is, for example, the right to create your own family, the right to have a certain distance from from something public, or the right to have secrecy. So it's your privacy. So here we see two different things here: right to life and right to private life. Right to life is generally you being a human being and have a soul, and no one can take your soul for any reason. That's why in the most extreme protection of human rights, even terrorism is not must not be condemned for death punishment. That's in the a very extreme level of human rights protection due to the right to life. And it's different with right to private life, where in this case, I want to have my own privacy, and and privacy means that the government must not watch me 24 hours, and I can have my own business that is protected, so not under the watch of certain bodies of government, something like that. Okay, and I believe this is my last slide, future for indigenous people and environment. So based on this whole scenario about indigenous people and environmental protection, the three main keys or the three main important factors are about representation, self-determination, and non-discrimination. So this is the three main issues for indigenous people and environmental uh, protection in international scheme. So the issue of representation, many of these conventions or many of these rules, even in our own country, even in Indonesia, when you create an undang-undang or peraturan something, um, the indigenous people so often not invited or not included in the process. So when the government come up with this idea about, for example, oh, we want to protect you by building a reservation or a spatial conservation area, well, they never actually ask the people, the indigenous people themselves. So it becoming problem more and more every day due to the less representation of the of this indigenous people in the lawmaking process, mainly in lawmaking process mainly. And then the issue of self-determination is where they have their own stand to regulate their own community, regulate their own needs, and also to express themselves. And the last one is the non-discrimination one, because not just in Indonesia, but we still witness a lot of tragedy involving indigenous community and the environment uh, due to the discrimination that is being enforced not just by government but also by the society in general. For example, like the many Native American in the United States, they still have um, they still have a lot of limitation in terms of their own civil and public rights as the citizen of the United States, which is actually very ironic, realizing that they are they're the original inhabitants or the original settlers of of the nation itself. So this is just to narrow it down. These three factors: representation, self-determination, and non-discrimination, are the three important points when we're talking about the problem with indigenous people and environment that we need to address in the future. And I think for the general overview, that is all, Bulinda. And
I'm still muted. Okay, thank you, Louis, for the very precise introduction, I suppose, for Indigenous people and the international environmental law. So I saw there were two questions earlier, right? That
yes,
you'd like to discuss for the question and answer.
Yeah.
And so I also think that Bondan's question was interesting.
yeah,
He's asking about UNDRIP and, you know, if it's legally binding, blah, blah, blah. But like as legal scholars, we need to know whether these international instruments in relation to the indigenous people issues, are they legally binding really, even though, you know, even though they are UN documents? So please, Ahul, if you want to elaborate on the, you know, first two questions earlier.
okay. I already addressed the first one, right? The first question was from Fajar, yeah? Yeah, and I already addressed it, right, Fajar? Or we can come back to it later. But okay, the one with Bundan. So this is based on my years of studying international law. I realized that sometimes, most of the time, when we're talking about international documents, whether it's in the form of convention or a covenant or a treaty or declaration, um, the main drive to ratify the documents or to obey to the points that are the values that are being up that are trying to be protected inside the documents are mainly not just because of this keinginan luhur, not just based on what to say, this pure intention to accommodate the issue, but there's actually bigger problem behind it, and this has something to do with politics, and I already mentioned it before. So in this case, you asked about the Freeport, right? The situation that is going on in Freeport.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
it is a very classical problem that the indigenous people and environment still have to face again and again, not just today, but also I believe in the future, because economic needs sometimes is being weighed more than the protection of indigenous people and environment itself. So it is not just an exclusive to the case of Freeport in Papua, but unfortunately, again and again, it happens everywhere in the world. So for the sake of development, for the sake of building business, for the sake of better economy, the government decided to just let go, or not let go. Sorry, to turn blind eyes on the indigenous community and also the environment issue. And the fact that is, for example, binding doesn't necessarily mean that the state will prioritize the document itself, because remember that each um, state member of certain international legal documents actually have their own prerogative to um, what you call it, uh, to what to extend and to apply or to limit the rules. So there's a term for that. I'm trying to remember. Okay, let's put it this way. So when Indonesia, for example, ratify a legal document on protection of indigenous people and environment, and that in fact they just turn blind when there's problem in Papua or different area. It, it's really depends on the government on how to interpret or how to work or to apply the values that is being um, written in the document itself. So there's no force. Remember that in the international law regime, who's the one who's the the ultimate state here? Even United Nations has no real and absolute power over the state members. So most of the time, the United Nations will probably send um, their commentaries, their critics to the state government in their annual reports or by the statutory body, but they don't have this real power to direct the government or a certain government to obey the um, rules in that legal document. That's from my perspective. So there are a lot of politics behind it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Wonder, I think it's a very valid question. Also, what you're asking, Mas Louie. Yeah. At some point, all of us in Jawa, or even Sulawesi, Sumatra, Kalimantan, we don't even know what's going on in Papua, to be honest,
Yeah,
right?
true.
And it's been going on like that for years. Ever since I was a student up until now, we never get a clear idea, even news about Papua or West Papua. So both provinces there are kept somehow, quote unquote, in the dark. So, which is weird because when we're talking about other under other indigenous people's conflict, for example, the ones that we worked on in Manggarai, right?
Yeah.
It's easy for us to get data, to get interviews, to get even court orders, right?
Yes.
Because they are there, we can just go and pick it up and go to people, and people are open to discuss it. I even went to Ambon and talked about some of the conflicts that happened there, and even though the situation is less friendly than the ones in Flores, but still, however, we can still easily get the data. But for Papua, on the other hand, is a little different. So
Yes.
yeah, so I'm guessing the bargaining position of indigenous people is always not in a very good place in relation to the market or the government. So their bargaining position is always lower somehow, even though they are the original owner of of
Yes.
the
Yes.
resources. But specifically for cases in Papua, I think it's worse than other places in Indonesia.
Yeah.
Not because we know it for sure. It's because we don't know it for sure, because we don't have
True.
data, we don't have the information. So it's like, yeah. So it's like grappling in the dark, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're following the UN General Assembly meetings from 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, I suppose, you'll get that also being discussed in that level. So that level is pretty high up there, right? When when
Yes.
when human rights violation, indigenous right violation is being discussed in the UN General Assembly. So it's somehow there are a lot of contestation in the island by so many countries. So there
Mm.
are a lot of I don't want to say this, but there is a lot of money being you know
Yes.
thrown and rethrown and then produced. Also, we're talking about the biggest gold mine in the world.
True. Yes.
Yeah.
The
So
interest. There's so many interests behind
yeah,
it.
yeah, there are a lot of interests, and also from the environmental point of view, there's also already a lot of destructions that took place in Papua in the national parks there. So there are like at least 3 national parks that has been badly influenced by those open mining techniques. So yeah, so not just Freeport, but there are other big players there. So yeah, so that's, I think that's my take. So a lot of people are in stake, even with the new government. Sometimes, well, not the new government, but the current government. Uh, we feel if you can open a communication channel to Papua, can we get some information like you know hard data? But somehow it's very hard.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions, please.
Hello, Adinda.
Hi, who is
Then
this?
M.Louie, this is Adinda.
Hi,
Hi.
Linda.
Hi,
Okay,
Dinda.
hello. So I want to ask maybe
not only for the Papua case, but also maybe in general, because I think there's a lot of clash between the interest of protecting indigenous rights and also like the economic incentives. Uh, I was just wondering, do you think there's any way to increase the incentive for companies to comply with this law in order to protect indigenous people's rights? Is there any way to increase the cost for them if they don't comply to this? So I mean, I know that companies care a lot about the costs and benefits of things. So do you think there's any way to incentivize good behavior towards indigenous people for them? Thank you.
Okay, Lul, you want to take a jab first?
Okay. Hello?
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead. Yeah,
Oh,
go
okay.
ahead, Ahmed.
So interesting. So here's the problem when we're talking about private business and government in one side and the community in the other side, the local community especially. Um, Oftentimes the local community, in this case the indigenous people, are not included in the process, as I said before. So the issue of representation is very lacking in this typical, but in this particular case. So when the government meet with the private business, they usually exclude the local community and think what is best for the benefit of the state and also the business, the private business. So not the people who lives, the original people who lives in that area, and that's where the problem begins. So, in my point of view, I think what we really need to do is to have a moment where all the stakeholders can actually sit down together. And of course, this is not an easy process. Um, Bulinda and I experienced this even in Manggarai. You know, there are so many people, the ketua adat, the administrative officers, and other people who have their own interest. But the problem here is how to communicate and how to come to the same understanding or the same perspective on seeing the issue itself. If we want to do it and for example in that way, yeah, because the indigenous people has their own mechanism. Remember, they have their own way to solve problems, especially when it's related to environment. And in Manggarai, for example, we call it Lontoleok. Yeah, Bulinda.
Yeah,
Lontoleok is, yes,
musyawarah
exactly. Lontoleok is musyawarah. It's where that's this is the process.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Lontoleok.
yeah. So it's where all the stakeholders are invited to sit together. So they sit together with the tetua adat and having discussion. It's very civilized, right? So when we have this imagination about adat people, well, in fact, in the reality, they're very civilized and they really want to listen. They really want to understand. So the very basic principle for protection of indigenous people, in my opinion, is actually having them represented because they will find the solution. Believe me, these people, the indigenous community, they are very open and they're willing to have solution if they are included in the process itself. So that's my take on this.
Okay, thank
More
you.
representation, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Ahlul. So, Dinda, so like the slide that you are seeing right now is part of our research in Manggarai. If you don't know where it is, so this is our country. The place is here in the island of Flores, and it's just right smack in the middle is the Kabupaten Manggarai. So we picked this place because this is like the highest conflicted area in terms of land and land use. So we went there. I did the research there with the team for 5 years, and part of our results from the research was making a module of conflict resolution, specifically
Yes.
adat land resolution, which like in turn it became a perda, so it was adopted by the local government.
Government.
Yeah, to be a regional like local regulation. So tingkat kabupaten ya, perda tingkat kabupaten.
Yeah.
So it was because we saw there is like the unbalanced bargaining position between, as you pointed out in your question, between the adat people and the market and the government. Like most of the time, the adat people will lose because they don't know what's going on. So what we're trying, this is of course a pilot project, but we are very optimistic that if this were to be replicated in other places in Indonesia, this might work as a solution for reducing the number of adat land conflicts in the areas. Yeah. So what we are proposing in this project is to use the mechanism that's already there instead of introducing like a new mechanism from the national law or even western law, which is quite further away from what we understand in the adat. So at, at some point, because we think if we're using adat way, right, it's cheaper, it's faster, it's already familiar for them, right? And
Effective.
yeah, and it's effective, and it's also it's giving them the kind of fairness that is traditionally accepted. So it's full of traditional wisdom, we should say. So this type of solution, I would say, it's like somebody's typing very loudly. Can you mute yourself? So this type of solution is, not like currently not being used in Indonesia. Only a few places, like we saw, like one in Central Sulawesi, and then one in Aceh, and then now in Manggarai. Those places have regional regulation for adat land conflict resolution. So, but if the adat way were to be acknowledged uh, further, we might be able to find a balance between government, market, and adat, because specifically under our legal system, we already
Yes.
acknowledge legal pluralism. So I think the biggest landmark case was from MK 35 2012 ya. Jadi keputusan Mahkamah Konstitusi which acknowledged the existence of hutan adat. So if the national government and the national court can understand the existence of adat and adat law, and how these people are accustomed to uh, balance their life, I think it will be better also,
Yes.
for us, for the people who live in the urban area, and also the people who live in the rural area, because you can search in Google, you can search in media outlet everywhere, and you'll see that it's endless point of conflicts over conflicts over conflicts. So and that's just in Indonesia. If you
globally.
go, yeah, if you go outside, you go to Brazil, you go to Congo, you go to, all of this, countries, you see how uh, indigenous people's rights are being, neglected.
Yes. Even in Europe, like in the case of Sami people in
Yeah, in
Scandinavia,
Norway.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, in
everywhere.
Japan,
I
yeah,
know,
yeah,
yeah, I
I
know.
think I discussed this somewhere. Maybe not in this class, maybe in other. I know people. They try to get their rights of acknowledgement from the government because their places were being torn apart by dam buildings. So it took them 5 years to go to the Supreme Court and then get acknowledgement from the Supreme Court. But at the same time, the dams were already built.
So
So
yeah,
yeah, so it's very sad
it's sad.
actually. Yeah, but at
Yeah,
least at least they get acknowledgement, and now they have a special status in
yeah,
the Japanese law. But but that's
yeah.
yeah, but that's how it is. Okay, other questions?
Hello, Mas. Hello, Mas Louie.
Hello,
I would just like
this
to
is
ask.
Rafino.
Yes. I think previously you've mentioned that I think all, if not most, of the international instruments were drafted or made without involving indigenous people. So,
Not all, some.
oh, some. Okay. So, if, for example, um, so I think they will risk that the product itself would not reflect the needs of the indigenous people. So what happens if the indigenous community were to reject for the enforcement of that international instruments? Maybe instead of protecting by enforcing the instruments, instead of protecting the community, it could maybe expose them more to dangers. So yeah, I think that's my question.
Okay. May I?
Yes, please.
Okay, okay. So I have two things in my mind right now. Okay. First, let's go to the ILO convention. Remember, we were talking about the ILO convention in the beginning. Um, there are actually two ILO conventions. The first one is number 107, and the one that has definitions about tribal peoples and indigenous people is 169. First of all, the ILO Convention number 107, the title of that convention is um, Indigenous People and Tribal Populations. While, so they use the wording here is populations instead of the people itself. And if you pay attention to the whole content of ILO Convention 107, you will notice that at first this UN body has this concept that indigenous indigenous population is not something that would last forever. They have that in their mind. So according to them, this is just a phenomenon where um, when the time is right, when the world itself is finally globalized and modernized, they will finally gone. So the the background idea on creating this convention on that moment was to accommodate they revised it. In the ILO Convention 169, they changed the wording, the terms they use. So no longer populations, but peoples, meaning individual and also the community, and, and begin to see the issue of indigenous peoples actually will not end forever. So they will exist forever. And instead of trying to accommodate them um, to go with the globalization and modernization, it is best to respect them the way they are. So there's a clear example there in the ILO. You can read more about it probably after this class. But those two ILO conventions, they're different because of this, approach. And why they change it? Why in ILO Convention 169 they change it? Because then these voices of indigenous community began to raise up. Remember, it was in 1989, so it was long time ago, and the movement began to have begin to pay more attention. And the other case that I want to talk about here is, do you know Shailene Woodley? Any of you? A Hollywood star from The Fault in Our Stars?
Yes, I know, Mas.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. How to pronounce her name? Shanley? Shane? Shanley? Shanley? Yeah, okay.
Shailene is correct.
Shailene, okay. So, do you remember what happened to her in 2016? Do you guys remember? She was being what was put in jail by the Trump government, right? If you pay attention to Hollywood, interesting thing. Hollywood entertainment is part of my other life, by the way. So,
Oh,
so
I'm
she
more
was
into
jailed.
Bollywood.
Yeah, versatile. I can do anything. Okay, so she was actually she was put into jail. She joined the protest together with the Native American community against the Donald Trump plan for building a oil pipeline. No one of you know this story? The
Is it the
Dakota
Dakota
access.
pipeline
Yes,
access, Mas?
yes. So she was there. She was standing up against the what you call it, the national project. And this is an example, a real example of how Donald Trump created the executive order, right? So he created this executive order to allow the oil pipeline to be built in the area crossing the sacred sites of the indigenous tribes, the Native American tribes. So when they know that the government actually sponsored this whole idea of building something that is not just dangerous to their environment because they live around, the pipeline area, but also disrespecting their heritage, disrespecting their own ancestral sites. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. So I'm just gonna add a little bit because the question was, what if we introduce these international instruments to the indigenous people, and then that these instruments make them in worse places than they were. So I'm guessing that should not be the case because the current practices in the international law of protecting indigenous people now, we have it's not just in UNDRIP but also in other mechanism. For
yeah,
example, RED, reducing environmental degradation through forest deforestation and deforestation, and also CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism. So before any projects took place in areas that are occupied by indigenous people, right? These instruments have what we call FPIC, free prior informed consent. So this is the consent that has to be earned by project organizer before they can even do the project. So it's like when you go to the doctor to get your tonsils out, or right now what's popular, like getting double eyelids. I don't know, to get some operations, right? And then,
Fillers.
yeah, and then you get this consent paper, yeah, that will tell you the worst of the worst. Like 80%, there's an 80% chance that this anesthesia will make you paralyzed. This is like all this bad and good thing, all these risks are given to you so that you understood what you are going through beforehand, before the operation. So this is exactly the same thing that has to be done before any projects take place, or any activities at all, right, would take place in like indigenous places. So I'm guessing like we should not also patronize indigenous people, like saying, okay, they don't need roads, they don't need hospitals, etc., etc. But it's up to them, right? We have to also honor their needs and what they want. If based on the aspect they really want, like some developments to make their lives easier, or somehow, it's part of the obligation of the government to also respond to that. Because from what I heard, there are places in the Taman Nasional in Sulawesi, if I'm not mistaken, Central Sulawesi, right? Where because of the fact that they are in the middle of the national park, when somebody died or somebody needed, like really fast attention to go to the hospital, or being buried, sometimes they have to put like the dead in the motorcycle and then tie it up to the driver, and then go get the dead people, because there's no road,
Yeah,
because
true.
because it's against the law to make roads into where they live. So
There are
which
always
is,
two sides.
yeah. So as legal scholars, as lawyers to be, I want you guys to be very sensitive in this particular issues. Not only because you're legal scholars, but also because you're Indonesians, right? Because we live in Indonesia, we breathe the same air as these indigenous people. Who knows that they were your grandmother, grandfathers,
Yeah,
relatives, right?
exactly.
So
Yes.
so there's no way of turning a blind eye. There's no way of trying to ignore them. We were that maybe several generations ago.
True.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? I suppose we ran out of time.
That's-
So, Louie, if you want to
Yes.
share your email address to
Okay.
the
Yeah.
students, so they could probably send emails to you if they have further questions.
Yeah. Sure. I'm typing it.
Okay.
Okay.
So the students, with that, I suppose we thank Mas Louie for giving us his time, his precious time with his nephews, to give us
Okay.
the lecture this afternoon. Thank you so much, Louie.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So
Arigato.
yeah, I hope this is as fruitful to you as it is for us. So I'll see
Of
you
course.
next week, everybody, and stay safe, stay healthy. Yeah, and see you next week. Assalamualaikum.
Bye bye.
Thank
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you,
you.
Bu.
Bye bye.
So bye.
Bu.
Thank you,
Sama-sama.
ma'am.
Yuk.
Thank you,
Bye.
ma'am.
Mas, Mbak.
Yuk. Yuk.
Thank you.
Yuk.
Sama-sama.
Bye.
Thank you, Mas.
Cheers. Yuk. Where's my blah blah here? Thank you, Errol.
Sama-sama. Whew.
Salam buat Taru.
Oh my god, it's just so loud. Dia tuh
No,
stres gara-gara tugas
but
SD.
when we're done, he's also done. Did you
I
notice
hate
that?
it. That's the fact that kids always do that is just unbelievable. Why would they do that? See, we're
Yeah.
done, and now that udah tidur siang sekarang.
Oh, that's
They're taking nap.
okay. That makes sense.
So
All right.
okay.
So
Anyway,
I'll see you tomorrow.
yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.